the case of Belizzotti, there was only one particular side value going up, and hemoglobin was totally uncorrelated.
I can't comment on the Belizzotti case.
And so the explanation you gave was okay, but it didn't hold for the Belizzotti case. I don't know whether he was involved in that.
He can't comment on it.
Oh, okay, great.
It's still going on. I've already professed my inability to understand mathematics. But if the risk of a false positive is 1 in 1,000.
Don't call it false positive. It's not a false positive.
And the abnormality is 1 in 1,000. I'm trying to have trouble distinguishing between the two.
We've tested literally hundreds of athletes and monitored how their blood changes over time.
Yeah.
And when you've got that, you can then estimate, well, it is essentially Z-scores, and you can say, okay, well, we would expect this much variation. And you set the threshold so that the variation is large enough that it would only be exceeded 1 in 1,000 times.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how you get that value.
The abnormality, the value of the abnormality.
What do you mean the value?
Well, what the APB is highlighting or by identifying as abnormal value.
The APB is a graph.
Yes, it's 1 in 1,000.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those red lines are the 1 in 1,000 limits.
Yeah. And why can't we call it a false positive?
Well, to my mind, a false positive is when you say you've doped and they didn't dope. All this is a graph showing that your variation is whatever. You can take those blue limits away, or the red limits away. You're just looking at the athlete's blood result.
I'm sure people understand better than I do. Keep trying that.
I think we have 3 questions in line from the floor.
G'day, just Nick here. Sorry, I'm a pest today. With the wire passport, so you've got a young rider. You've monitored him for 6 or 12 months that he's at a lower level pro Conti team. You would obviously have your defined confidence intervals, or your red lines that you demonstrated before. He moves to a much higher level professional team. He's subject to much better and more intense training and everything that comes along with being at a pro tour status team. His levels, his scores, his performance is increasing, his blood values are improving up and beyond what he was able to achieve with his previous team. Would that not shift him higher up the scale and then make him more likely to register abnormal scores above your red line limits? Do you know, or does the bio passport have the ability to shift on a longitudinal basis with the rider's improved blood values?
Blood values don't improve with training. That you don't see an increase in hemoglobin when they train better. That's not what happens. The passport does adjust to what it's seeing, but that's not something that needs to be adjusted for. You don't see hemoglobin levels change with performance. They change during a multi-day stage race, but not when you're training, month after month after month.
Okay, so, if you were to take me now and took 12 months of my samples and then put me in a pro team, my levels are going to be the same as what you've got for 12 months for me now, as opposed to me riding 12 months for, for lamprey or something like that.
For all intents and purposes, yeah. Yeah, most of the pro teams base it out too.
It's just like, when you said you disregarded those scores, sorry, are they disregarded in the sense that or they're kept there, and because if you're constantly going to altitude, there's going to be constant sort of disregarded sort of scores. Like, are you then able to then continually take them into consideration, or does it go? Do you wipe it and then go, oh, hang on, there's another score that we've got since 3 months down the track?
The way you disregard, the results are in the database, they're there. And there's a column on the left-hand side that you can check, that you want that value included, you don't want it included. So you uncheck that box, so that value is not included, then you go in to look at the graph after that.
Oh, hi. My name's Andrew Young, just an enthusiast. Thinking about the Palizzotti case, which maybe some of you can't talk about, it seems like he's having to defend something that can't be defended. He has a value that's abnormal, and you can't prove that there's nothing that you can prove, and yet you have to defend yourself because it's your livelihood and perhaps a criminal charge that you're up against, and you have nothing that you can say on. It's just a strange blip, and yet the onus is on you to prove that you're not guilty, and yet there's nothing that you can prove because you've just been maintaining a normal regime, a normal life. And what a lot of this discussion seems to be about is that there's a system in place to test whether riders are doping or not, and it's a flawed system, and when there are abnormalities or signs that a rider may or may not have been doping, the presumption is that they are, and they're not allowed to race, then they have to prove that they haven't been, but they have no tools to prove it with because there's no evidence that you can, or proof that you can use to say that you have or you haven't. And it seems to be a very strange, circular, sophisticated kind of non-argument, and it seems like a really strange way of approaching something that, when there have been other tests in the past that seem to have a greater chance of proving success or not success in terms of the 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000 statistical anomaly. And I don't know. My main question, I suppose, is how do you defend something like that? How do you defend an abnormality or a false positive or whatever?
I'm not going to talk about health.
Yeah.
The way that I understand that I'm being asked to evaluate the evidence now is to say, what is the likelihood, I want to talk about hemoglobin. What is the likelihood of a hemoglobin of 170 given the athlete's dope? And I'm asked to evaluate that. And then I'm asked to evaluate what is the likelihood of a hemoglobin of 170 given that the athlete didn't dope. Now, if that chance result, the 1 in 1,000, is just outside of the limits, I would say, well, the likelihood of it coming, likelihood of that value if the athlete doped, likely. What's the likelihood of it coming if the athlete hadn't doped? Well, likely. And so the ratio of those two is hardly going to be enough to sustain a case. So that would be my process. And if I came to the opinion that likely versus somewhat likely is enough to run the case, I'd expect that the athlete's defence to contest that. And it would be a pretty robust defence, I think.
From a legal perspective, I couldn't see any other way around it other than the athlete getting into the witness box and giving their response to it, because there's an opportunity within the protocol to provide an explanation, and ultimately it's a case they have to answer for, and unless you can otherwise challenge the case brought against the athlete, in other words, find some fundamental flaw in the manner in which the test has been undertaken, find some fundamental procedural flaw in the way in which the opinion has been reached, apropos my remarks earlier about experts' protocol and the cold objectivity and fairness being brought to the actual task of the opinion, then ultimately it will turn upon the athlete's evidence and whether or not the athlete is believed.